A day to remember for the rest of your lives.
There's a great promise for all of you.
The Pro Football Hall of Fame and Extreme Networks present the Heart of a Hall of Famer program. With nearly 100 Hall of Famers participating, we have reached 48 states around this country, sharing the message that football is more than a game and can teach Americans how to huddle up during a time when we need to be united.
It's time for America to take a real deep dive. Not at no one else, but at yourself individually. If you want to change America, don't brush your teeth with your head down. Look at who you are and be the example. Be the example.
An opportunity to meet and learn from one of the greatest football players of all time. But more than that, the chance to see that their Hall of Fame life wasn't given to them. Single-parent homes, drug-infested neighborhoods, and poverty.
I grew up in a neighborhood that was considered one of the worst in America, and the household I grew up in was one of the worst in that neighborhood. By the time I was 20 years old, I knew at least 30 friends or family members who had lost their lives. Football became like a second parent to me. It taught me the things that my father wasn't there to teach me, and that my mother, as a struggling, single-parent woman, just didn't know to teach me.
But they learn how to live a life of character before pursuing their football careers. Today, you will learn you can do the same that they once did. Making good decisions can lead to a prosperous life both on and off the field. Your game for life has already begun. It's your decision whether or not you want to be a successful student, son, daughter, brother, or sister.
Every one of you can have a Hall of Fame life, whether or not you play football. You can be as great as you want to be. The Hall of Fame is all about integrity, character, and excellence. You have the opportunity to represent yourself that way. You determine your character.
Welcome to a once-in-a-lifetime program, the Heart of a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think America loves it because of what it stands for. I think it stands for to be great at something. You have to have some element of sacrifice, right? Some element of perseverance, some element of toughness to be good at anything. And I think, a lot of the things that football stands for in life. If you want to be great at business, you want to be great as a father, you want to be great as whatever you're going to be, you have to kind of concentrate on all those things. And there's a lot of things maybe are a little bit hard to do, but that's what makes them great. So, and football's a hard sport. I mean, if it was easy, everyone would do it. So I think it's a hard sport, and when it's hard, that's what makes it great. I think of all the things you learn, like we just talked about, right? The sacrificing, perseverance, hard work, all those things. Being prepared, paying attention, being on time, all the stuff that is just, people talk about or maybe words, but that's kind of like what you live by. That was what you did growing up and playing football and sports in general. So I tried to take that into my business life and felt like that, no one was going to outwork me. No one was going to be more prepared than I was. And I think that served me very well over the last 30 years of being in business.
All right, and with that, I'd like to welcome everybody to another edition of the Pro Football Hall of Fame's Heart of a Hall of Famer program, powered by Extreme Networks. My name is Jake Gray, and I'm the Youth and Education Manager at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, where our mission is to honor the heroes of the game, preserve its history, promote its values, and to celebrate excellence everywhere. Those values we speak on are those of commitment, integrity, courage, respect, and excellence, all of which we'll talk to you today. Normally, coming to you live from Canton, Ohio at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but just like everybody else around the country, I'm at home in my homemade studio here in my dining room. So I'm just happy to be able to come to you guys live today on Facebook, featuring the new class of 2020 enshrinee, Mr. Jimbo Covert. And we'll get to him in a second. But before we do, just a little bit, we talked about the Pro Football Hall of Fame's mission and values, and we're going to talk a lot about those today and how they make our Hall of Famers not only Hall of Famers, on the field, but Hall of Famers off the field as well. Some thank yous I'd like to shout out here. First off, I'd like to thank our great partners at Extreme Networks. They do a lot of great work for us at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. They're providing the opportunity for everybody to connect in today. They do a lot of great work for schools across the country. So we first and foremost want to thank them for their great support. Secondly, I'd like to thank all of our students today. You know, normally students, you're tuning in to us from your classroom with your teachers today. But I guarantee a lot of you are at home, just like I am, tuning in today to hear about Mr. Covert's career on and off the field and all the great lessons that football taught him. So we want to thank you for tuning in, and all those teachers and parents who are becoming teachers now, teaching their students at home. So we want to thank everybody who's tuning in today. And lastly, like everybody else is doing, we want to thank all those frontline workers who are committing a ton of their time to protect everybody throughout the country. So we want to thank all of those frontline workers, the doctors, nurses, policemen, firefighters, all those people who are, you know, putting their lives at stake every day to protect us and our country. So we want to thank them as well. So that's enough of me talking. Without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to class of 2020 enshrinee, a member of the Centennial class, Mr. Jimbo Covert.
Hey, Jake, how you doing this morning? Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thanks for tuning in. Do you have any opening remarks, you know, you'd like to make here before we get started?
Sure, it's just a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. And I know it's trying circumstances around the country, around the world with everything going on. And it's been, I think, quite a challenge for everyone, especially our frontline healthcare workers and the people that are out there every day doing their job, the doctors and nurses, the first responders. I mean, they're putting their life kind of in harm's way every day to make sure that they can make it better for every one of us and all of us, especially in those settings where it's extremely difficult. And you've seen a lot of loss of life in families that is just devastating and heartbreaking. So, I mean, I think, you know, we just have to concentrate on trying to get our country back and get it to a place where everybody's safe. It's no small task, but I think with, you know, the values that you mentioned at the beginning of the values of the Pro Football Hall of Fame are, I think, something that I always try to aspire to. And I think many people that are out there do the same thing. And that's why America works. And we're going to get back to where we were before. It's going to take us a little bit of time, and we got to do it the safe way. But, you know, my heart goes out to all those people, and I'm praying for them. And I just hope that, you know, they can find some solace in the fact that, you know, we're going to try to get this thing back on track and have everybody get back to normal.
So those values you talked about there, commitment, integrity, courage, respect, and excellence, you know, those values, you learn a lot. You know, I played the game a little bit, definitely not to the level that you did. But, you know, you learn these values from sports and anything you like to do, you know, outside those extracurriculars that you'd like to be a part of. How do the values, like those 5 values, make you a better athlete or a better musician, but also help make you a better person, a better businessman, a better father, son, brother, whatever it might be off the field?
I think they all do. I think for athletes and business people and anybody that's good at what they do, teachers, you know, first responders, anybody that's good at what they do, I think the most important thing to remember is that those just aren't words. You know, they're values and things that you aspire to in some cases. Some things you achieve those, but they're not just words. You know, people live by those things. You know, that's kind of their creed, and that's how they become high, you know, performing athletes. That's how they become high performing business people. You know, a lot of the things that I learned on the football field and the things I learned growing up and in a small town in Pennsylvania and growing up and playing sports is all those things just weren't words. You had to live by them. If you had to outwork people, I always said no one's going to outwork me. I might not be the greatest athlete in the world, but no one's going to outwork me. And I think that goes to show you on how important it is that just to live by, you know, sacrificing and hard work and dedication is something that, you know, you aspire to. But if you can achieve those, then you can achieve great success in your life.
So, you know, you kind of talked about your career there in a 10,000 foot view. You know, you start in the hotbed of what some may say of football there in Western PA, where a lot of great Hall of Famers, you know, had grown up and played high school ball and eventually found their way to the Hall of Fame. You know, you went to the University of Pittsburgh, and, you know, coming out of college in 1983 in the NFL draft, you were, you know, a first round pick, the 6th overall pick. So, coming out of the draft, was there any added pressure, on you being such a high top draft pick? Some that, some of the guys who were just drafted a few weeks ago might be feeling the same kind of way.
I don't think it was really pressure. I think it was a challenge. I thought it was an opportunity for me to show what I could do. And I know there was a tremendous amount of expectation, high expectations when you get drafted that high, because people expect you to go in and play immediately, which I did. And, when you get in there you have some difficulty early on, just trying to understand the difference between the pro game and the college game, and, how different that is. It's extremely different. And, every guy you play against in the pros is an All-American and guys that are really good players. So you had to kind of up your game. But I learned around guys that, I got a chance to play with. There was a center who was a University of Kentucky guy named Dan Deal, older guy, played center. And I kind of looked up to him because, he tried to show you, kind of lead the way to what to be a professional was. Mm-hmm. And, other guys, obviously Walter Payton and Jim McMahon, and great players on defense, Steve McMichael and Dan Hampton, Richard Dent and Mike Singletary, all those guys, of course. But I think you connect with some people on the offensive side of the ball, especially Walter and Danny Neal and guys like that. And Matt Suey, and you just realize that, hey, here's a role model for you to look at on here's how to be a good player, here's how to be a good professional, show up to work all the time, on time, pay attention, and do the things necessary to be successful. So I think there's a little bit of pressure, but you got to rise above that and realize that you're there to do a job and do it well.
Now, a lot of people may have heard of the 1983 NFL draft for being the best quarterback draft of all time, but you also get thrown into that conversation. With your induction to the Hall of Fame, 7 first-round draft picks from that draft class are now Hall of Famers. So you're definitely in a special class. It's one of the best draft classes ever. And you mentioned, looking up to different people on the team, and there had to be younger players that did the same thing to you. And even in your second season, you were named a captain for the Bears. What did being named, and only your second season, being named the captain for the entire team mean to you?
Well, I think it meant a lot to me because my teammates elected me. It wasn't appointed by the coaches or any kind of the owners or anything. Your teammates, elected you to that role. And that's what really meant a lot to me. And, I always tried to do, Jake, I tried to lead more by example. I wasn't really that vocal all the time. I said things that I needed to say when they needed to be said. And I think when I did say those things, people listened because they would listen to you if you didn't talk too much. You just showed what you could do on the field, and you tried to lead by example. And so kind of like the E.F. Hutton things, when you talk, people listen. It's the same thing, because if you're talking all the time, people kind of tune you out. I think if you lead by example in the things that you do, people take or respect that. And that's what really, I think for me, it touched me, because those guys had the confidence in saying that here's a guy in only a second year that can be one of our leaders.
So you mentioned, leading by example and a great value like respect, and playing with a guy like Walter Payton, who we all know, has the award, the Walter Payton Man of the Year award, named after him for all the great things he did, on and off the field. You hear all these great stories about the guy, Walter Payton, but being his teammate, do you have any specific examples of, how just great of a person Walter Payton was, and what was it like being Walter's teammate with the Bears?
There's so many things I could say about Walter Payton. I was really lucky because Matt Suey was my roommate on the road. And in the old days, everybody had a room together. Now they all have their own rooms. The only one that had a single room was Walter, but his room was always next to ours in an adjoining, door. So he was always over in our room a lot on the road. And I got a chance to know him probably better than most guys on the team, but he was such a remarkable person. He was such a great football player. I think the greatest football player that ever lived, and I mean that. But he was even a better person. And he really cared about people individually. And you would see him up at training camp and signing all those autographs. And when he would talk to you, it didn't matter if you were a fan or a first-round draft pick or the free agent, the last guy to make it on the team. When you talked to him, you felt like you were the most important person in his life at that time. He had that innate ability to make you feel special. It's hard to do. Not too many people have that. And he just really genuinely cared about people. And, that's not a phony thing. I mean, people can smell that, people can see that, sift through that pretty easily. So when you see someone like him, and what the impact he had on not only the game, but his teammates and people in Chicago, it was pretty amazing.
So would you say you would be comfortable saying, Walter Payton left an impact on your life?
Oh, I mean, I miss him every day. I mean, I just felt like he was one of the people that you just looked up to, and you knew he was going to be there every day, and he was going to do his job, and did some amazing things on the field that left his teammates in awe, And so I just felt like he was just, Superman. And when you started thinking about, comparing him to players, and it's hard to compare him. I mean, he had to be compared to all the Hall of Famers and the legends and all the guys that started this game, that's who he needs to be compared with.
You spent a majority of all your career with the Chicago Bears, which totaled, I think, 8 seasons. Was there something special? I know the Chicago Bears are one of the most historical franchises in the game even today. What was it about the Bears organization that kind of kept you in Chicago? And in all your 8 seasons, why was it important for you to stay in Chicago?
Well, I think it's just the tradition that they have, that winning tradition, and I guess all the way back to being one of the founding members of the National Football League. And I think that's what's really, for me, is inspiring, because they were one of the founding franchises, and to be elected into the Hall of Fame on the centennial class on the 100th year anniversary is pretty cool. And being a Chicago Bear. So, and I just think that, the real kind of attitude and, the tradition that, Mike Ditka brought back to the Bears when he came back to be coach in 1982. I started there in 1983. So, we were on a mission, to prove that we could play with the best teams in the league. And we had a cast there. And then you talk about the draft in 1983 that kind of took us to, I think, over the top there. They had so many great players when we got there, just were not playing up to where, they needed to play. And then bring the 83 and 84 guys in, I just think we got to, to the pinnacle after that.
And that leads me right into my next question. You mentioned, 83, 84, and then we get to that magical year, 1985. Everybody knows how famous that 85 Bears team is. And, normally, the defense gets all the highlights and mentions when we talk about the 85 Bears. But what does that year, 1985, mean to you?
Well, I think you're right. I think they do, deservedly so. I mean, they were one of the greatest defenses of all time, and they deserve that. But I think what gets lost on people is, the first couple of games of the year, we had to come from behind and win those games. I think our defense started a little bit slow early in 1985. And then I think if you look at what we did, we got so overshadowed by that. But, we led the league in rushing, led the league in time possession. We were second in the league in scoring, led the league in first downs. It makes your defense pretty good. So people don't really realize that or remember that or don't want to remember that. And I think that's what I look back on and said, it was a team. It wasn't just a half a team. It was a team, offense, defense, and special teams. And I think that's what made us such a good team in 85.
We look at all the, these dynasties that happened, the Packers in the 60s. More recently, you had the Patriots dynasty with Brady and Belichick. And, a lot of people have the opportunity to be a part of these franchises, to be a part of that 1985 team. What does it feel like? And when you look back on your career, what is it like to say, I was on that 1985 Bears team? What does that kind of nostalgia mean to you?
I think it's kind of cool because you get recognized as that. I mean, when someone says, they said, where'd you play? I play with the Bears. You're on the 85 team? I mean, it was just, it's just such a legendary team that people want to know about it, want to hear about it. They obviously talk about the defense. I try to remind them that we were a pretty good offense too. I just think that it's recognized as one of the greatest teams that has ever been assembled. We didn't have the run that the San Franciscos and the Patriots and other teams did during those times, just because, there are key positions where we couldn't keep healthy, unfortunately. And that kind of led to us not having the success that we should have. But at the end of the day, that one year, I would put our team up against any team in the history of the NFL.
So you mentioned, that dominant defense, and, everybody dreaded going up against them on Sundays, but they only had to do that once a year. You had to do it every day at practice. What was it like, lining up across from that vaunted 85 Bears defense, every day throughout the season?
Well, I think that made our offensive line that much better, because if you think about it, when I'm going against Richard Dent, you got Dan Hampton, Steve McMichael, William Perry, we have Mike Hardenstein, Mike Singletary. I mean, we had players, that would come and bring it. Otis Wilson, Wilbur Marshall. I mean, these guys were just, exceptionally good players. And when you're practicing against them every day in practice, you had to bring your A game. So what it was doing was, you weren't relaxing it or brother-in-lawing it or taking it off. In practice, it was live a lot of times. And I think I made Richard better. He made me better. I think we made our defense better. They made us better, obviously. So I think that when you can do that and step up your game, the games on Sunday were easy compared to what we did in practice.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, I going through and, doing some research on your career, I found some quotes I wanted to read and see what they meant to you. The first one comes from Hall of Fame coach Bill Parcells. Said Covert was better than all those guys in the NFC at the time. Way better. It's not close. He was one of the best in my 30 years of football. Other guys would have to help against Taylor, talking about Lawrence Taylor. And the second one comes from your coach, Mike Ditka, after you were drafted. Jimbo was the guy we wanted. From day one, we put him at left tackle and moved on. You don't get too many people who come along who can make an impact. And he had the respect of all of his teammates and all of his coaches. So to have those quotes come from two now Hall of Famers, as a player and even a Hall of Famer now, what does, something like that being said about you mean?
Well, I think it just reminds you that, that you get, if you play at a high level and consistently, you're going to get some recognition. But to hear it from guys like, Bill Parcells, always had a tremendous amount of respect for Bill Parcells. I thought I was actually going to get drafted by the Giants. I talked to him at one of the scouting combines in 1983, and that's where I thought I was going to go. End up going to the Bears in the 6th pick. So I just really had a lot of respect for him and what he did with the Giants, and to say that is pretty cool. And then with Mike Ditka, as you talked about earlier, I think there was some expectation when I got there, and they just plugged me in there and just kind of maybe took you for granted for a little bit, because they just said, here's a guy who can come in and play right away. Rookies aren't supposed to do that. Did you have some struggles early on? Yeah, but you kind of righted the ship and got yourself to a point where you were one of the best performers on the team in your first year, and I think that meant a lot to me to have him say that.
So I also read a lot about you had a lot of great battles against that Giants team and against another Hall of Famer, Lawrence Taylor. He's one of the best defensive players that the game has seen, and you got to go up against him. So what is, there's so many guys who can get that recognition that you probably played against, but a guy like Lawrence Taylor really stands out. How is it, playing against a guy of that caliber, and did there have to be any extra preparation going into those type of games?
Sure, there's a lot of extra preparation going against Lawrence Taylor. I think he's the greatest defensive player that ever played. So when you see that, you had to do a lot of extra preparation. And, I was able to have some success against him. But I think it goes back, Jake, to what you were talking, before, is when you're playing against a Hall of Fame player in practice every day, like Richard Dent, you amp up your game. And, when you had to play against guys like Lawrence Taylor, I was prepared for that because I was playing against guys like Richard Dent. So I think other guys maybe not, because they're not having that kind of tempo at practice and the things you need to do to be successful. We beat each other up pretty good in practice, but, that paid off in the games.
So we got a question here on Facebook, kind of along the same lines. This is from, and before I say, if you're watching us on Facebook right now, feel free to submit a question there in the chat. We're going to do our best to get it into the program. So this question comes from Ronald. It said, was there a non-marquee player? So maybe a guy who isn't a Hall of Famer, or maybe played just a handful of years in the NFL, that you had more difficulty playing against than others?
Well, I think the best, defensive lineman, defensive end that I ever played against is a guy named Leroy Selma. Of course, he's a Hall of Famer. But he played in Tampa, and I don't really believe got the recognition that he deserves. If he would have played in a big city, you know, there'd be statues. They'd be erecting to him because he was so much better than everybody else. I mean, he could do everything. I think if you talk to a lot of left tackles that played in the early 80s, you know, late 70s, early 80s, they're going to tell you he was one of the best they ever played against or the best they ever played against. You know, I thought he was just exceptional. And then there's guys you never even heard about. I mean, we played Green Bay twice a year, and they had a defensive end named Robert Brown who had like one of the hardest heads I ever had to go up against because he was like a mountain trying to move. And, you know, I always thought my forte was, you know, run blocking, and he was a pretty good matchup. So there's just guys like that you think about back in your career that maybe no one's ever heard of that were great football players.
So, you know, we get through your career, and let's fast forward here to you know, the last couple of months where you got a pretty great phone call, you know, letting you know you were a member of the class of 2020, the Centennial class. You know, you've obviously been out of the game a long time, and that award to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame hasn't come a calling or come a knocking, you could say, until this year. What did that phone call mean to you, and your initial reaction after you heard you were going to be enshrined into the Pro Football Hall of Fame?
Well, I kind of said this before, you know, I didn't really have a lot of expectation. You know, I talked to Dan Pompei, who's the Chicago representative, and, you know, when this whole format changed with the Centennial class and, you know, having, you know, not anything against the writers, but to have a different group of people voting, right? To have, you know, Bill Belichick and coaches and personnel guys and, you know, like Carl Peterson and Ron Wolf and guys like that. And then, you know, have some players like Ozzie Newsome and Dick LeBeau. I think it changed the dynamic in the room and maybe had people maybe look at your career a little bit differently. And I think Dan did a remarkable job. So, you know, kind of leading that up, I didn't really have the expectation because, you know, it was my 26th year of eligibility, you know, but I knew I had a shot, and I was kind of on pins and needles a little bit. I was actually in San Francisco working, and David Baker called me about 4:30 in the morning. So woke me up, and you know, you always think about, you know, you look back and you say, well, how would you, you know, what would you have said differently or done differently? What would your reaction been differently? But, you know, I got it, and I said this before, it's like your whole life, you know, kind of flashes in front of you in like a second, you know, because you start thinking about, you know, your parents and where you grew up and your grandparents and your wife and your kids and your entire family, your brothers and sisters, and then all your teammates from high school and, you know, Pop Warner in high school and college, and then, you know, the Bears, and you get really emotional. I mean, it's an emotional moment, and you try not to be, but, you know, you just get flooded with all these memories in a nanosecond, and it's hard to remain composed when you get that. I mean, it was a pretty special moment. Was there a certain person that you called right away, or who was the first person that you reached out to after you found out? I called my wife right away, Jake, and I got her on the phone, and I called my mother right after that. So after my wife and my mom, then you know, then your phone starts blowing up and you get all the texts and everything like that, which it was honestly, it was a really cool day. It was a really cool day. Were there any Hall of Famers that you reached out to you after, you know, the news came out that you were going to be inducted? Well, you know, Dan Marino and I are still really good friends, and I mean, great friends, been that way since college. And he was one of the first guys to reach out to me. I think it was probably like 5 minutes in, you know, he called me. So it was, yeah, it was cool. And then just all your teammates and people from, you know, all the way back from, you know, Pop Warner football reaching out to you. So I don't know how they got my number, but they did. So it was just good to hear from them. You know, you mentioned there in talking, you know, when you notify your family and all these emotions come flooding back, you know, throughout your career growing up from a youth, you know, all the way to your time in the NFL, were there lessons that your family taught you or people you looked up to when it came to, you know, things about working at home, things just go off, or people that you looked up to throughout your career that, you know, changed the way, or, you know, changed the path of your career throughout your entire time in the game of football? That's a great question. I think the first thing for me was I was really fortunate. I had, great role models because they were right down the hall. My parents were such great role models. My mom, worked, it was a housewife, but worked at J.C. Penney's part-time. And then my dad was a steel mill worker, worked on Armco Steel, was a plant guard there. And then, 1 week a month, he worked there 33 years. My grandfather worked there 44 years. And then, 1 week a month, he would come home, shower, and then go back out in the Sears and Roebuck moving truck for another 8 hours, moving appliances for people. So, when you see that kind of work ethic and you grow up with that kind of work ethic, it just shows you that, if you work hard, good things will happen to you. And that's what I always tried to be like. And then I had a great high school coach and a guy named Chuck Lucidor. And then, going to Pitt, I had Jackie Sherrill. And then I think the greatest offensive line coach that ever lived, a guy named Joe Moore, who coached a lot of NFL Hall of Famers and pretty special. And then when I got to Pitt, I had Dick Stanfield, or to the Bears, Dick Stanfield, who's a Hall of Famer. As well. So, and Mike Ditka. So I was really lucky to have great coaches and great teammates my whole career.
I got another question here coming from Facebook. This is from Tim. It says, did you ever think about getting into the coaching ranks in the NFL or any level, after your career was over?
That's a great question. I didn't. I just, for some reason, working with kids and doing that, I always liked to do that. I thought that was a lot of fun when I would do some camps and stuff in the summertime. But I think it takes a special kind of person to be a football coach or any coach. I think it does. You got to be such a giving person, to give of yourself. And not that I didn't want to do that. I just felt like I could do some other things when I was done playing. I felt like I might have had an aptitude a little bit towards business than coaching, and I gravitated towards that. Plus, I think coaching is a really hard life. It is. I have a lot of respect for coaches. They got to move around a lot. They got to be in different places. If you're a coach, there's a pretty good chance you're going to get fired one day. And so it's just difficult, but I have a lot of respect for them.
So you mentioned about giving back to your community a little bit there, as a member, in the Chicago area, and even where you grew up or live today, why is it important for not only athletes, but for everybody if they have the opportunity presented to them, to give back to their community?
I think it's really important because I think, where you live, what you do, how you can contribute to that it makes an impact. And I think that there are a lot of deserving and needy people in your community that just need a hand up, just want to feel like they can succeed if they get maybe a little bit of assistance. And I think there's an opportunity to do that and impact people's lives in ways that really will be extremely important for them and life-changing for them, and maybe not hardly much of an effort on your part. So I think that we take that for granted, and expect someone else to do it. But if someone else, might say the same thing, then it's never getting done. So I think, anywhere you can help in your community, and any little piece of that you can take up and take the torch and, run with it, I think is important.
Got another question coming in here on Facebook, and there's this little tiny show that's on ESPN every Sunday called The Last Dance, about this basketball player that was named Michael Jordan, who played in Chicago. And you were in the area, in the Chicago area around time when Michael's career was just taking off. Did you happen to have any interaction with him?
Sure.
Throughout your career and into his basketball career?
Sure, yeah. Michael used to come in our locker room a lot early on when he came with the Bulls, and kind of hang out after the game, and come in and watch the game and hang out after the game. He is an incredible person. I got a chance to play golf with him a couple times as well, and I think not just his athletic stature. I think he's the greatest basketball player that ever lived, and he showed that on the court all the time. But Michael's a great person. He's always treated me and other people that I've seen him around great. And so I always enjoy being around him, and hope to play golf with him again one day.
Like I said, I go through and do some research when we do these programs. I have a list of some awards and honors you received, so I'm going to read them out here, and it's a pretty good list. So here's a list of the Hall of Fames that Mr. Covert's inducted in. You got the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the College Football Hall of Fame, Beaver County Sports Hall of Fame, National Italian American Sports Hall of Fame, the Western Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic League Hall of Fame, and the Pennsylvania Sports Hall of Fame. And on top of all of that, you've had your you've on the University of Pittsburgh's all-time team. You've had your number 75 retired by the university. You were a two-time All-Pro, a Super Bowl champion, and a member of the 1980s All-Decade team. So safe to say that your career was pretty good. Out of all those awards and honors, to your career, what do those mean?
Oh, I just think to get the recognition in a team sport is really hard to do, because at the end of the day, I played with five guys, and we were like a finely tuned machine. And if I didn't, Mark Bortz didn't know what I was doing. He didn't know it was Hilge and Tom Thayer and Keith Van Horn. We played as a team. So to get recognized as an individual in a team sport, especially the offensive line, which is kind of like a team within a team, is hard to do. And I think to have that is just a reflection on what we did as a group and what we did as a team. So, all those things, all those honors, my dad told me a long time ago, and he was, when you think back of things that he talked about, maybe you didn't listen too much, but I remember him telling me this. He said, when you're younger, he said, listen, you always put the team first. And if all your team goals, you achieve them, all the individual goals will fall into place right out underneath it. Now that's, I think, very, very true. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but at the end of the day, it's in a team game. If the team wins, you usually get the accolades.
You talk about being an offensive lineman, and we talked with Steve Hutchinson a few weeks ago. We kind of touched on, what it meant to be an offensive lineman and be within that team within a team, as you said. Normally when an offensive lineman has their name called, it's for something that they did wrong. Sure. So, growing up and being an offensive lineman, did you take pride in, being that guy who may not have his name, in the paper every week, or may not get recognized for all the hard work, but as an offensive lineman, was there sort of pride that your team of five and even beyond that had when you were with the Bears?
Sure, Jake. I think that I really took I was more gratified than when, Walter Payton, when he had a great game, he knew, he really knew where that came from and who's responsible for that. Not only himself, but the guys that blocked for him. Same thing with Jim McMahon, other guys. Why do you think all those quarterbacks are so close with their offensive linemen, right?
Yeah.
Because they know what those offensive linemen are going to do for that quarterback and protect him every day. Same thing with the running back. So I kind of always thought that if you had the respect of those guys, to your teammates, then you knew you were doing a good job.
Got another question coming in here on Facebook. We're talking about offensive lines, and we're going to kind of pivot to today's game. Are there any cohesive groups of offensive lines you see in today's game that kind of remind you of that group that you were part of in the 80s there with the Bears?
It's hard to do that now, because of free agency and guys moving around, because you don't see that. Like when I was playing, I think it's a little bit different because you had, even before that, the team guys I looked up to were the Steelers offensive linemen. Those guys in the late 70s, mid 70s, early 80s, those guys, John Cole, Mike Webster, Larry Brown, Sam Davis, those guys are awesome. And then you look at the Raiders, guys at the offensive line that they had with Art Shell and Gene Upshaw. And then obviously the Hogs, everyone talks about. The Rams had a great line with Jackie Slater and Ken Hill and, Dennis Hurrah and those guys. So those are kind of the guys that I know of because they played so long together. It's hard to go nowadays and see because, I played with the same five guys for 7 years. I don't think you're ever going to see that again in the NFL. So it's hard to kind of pick somebody out, an offensive line out now.
So, throughout that list of guys and teams you just read there, you hit on a lot of guys who are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame already. And, you haven't taken part. Normally we like to show the bronze bust in the gallery, talk about your career a little bit, but obviously you haven't gone through that ceremony yet. Whenever it does happen, whenever you get to put that gold jacket on, what are you most looking forward to when the time does come for you to be enshrined officially into the Pro Football Hall of Fame?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's such an overwhelming experience to begin with, and now when the enshrinement hopefully will come up pretty soon is, it's going to be, again, all these emotions, but, be really look forward to sharing it with my family and friends and just celebrating it, because it's, like I said, it's not just me, it's the guys I played with and the people that have influenced me over the years, and people that I think I've looked up to, not only just in sports, but in business as well. So I'm looking forward to that day.
Is there a guy you're most looking forward to meeting or being acquainted with again, that you may have met throughout your career, who's already in the Hall of Fame?
Well, you know what, I got to tell Joe Green that, because I grew up in Pittsburgh and he was my idol. I love Joe Green, and I had 75 in high school, and then I had 75 with Pitt, and then when I got to the Bears, someone had 75, so I couldnn't get it. Now, maybe you could buy it back then, but we didn't make the kind of money that I say you buy it now. So I went to 74, but I told Joe Green that's why I had that number for all those years, because, and Mal Blunt and, and look, and Donnie Shell in the same class that I am in. And, all those guys were just, I really looked up to them.
Now you've mentioned this a couple of times, your business career after you were done playing football, and some of the stuff you're even doing now, after your career was over, you've gotten stuff from healthcare to physical therapy, consulting, nonprofit medical work. Why was it important for you to get involved in that field of work, after your NFL career was over?
I looked at a lot of different things when I was going to be done, because I was fortunate enough to play in the city of Chicago, which is, I think, the greatest city in the world and the, best fans in the world. And if you're going to extend your, go into a career, a business career after sports, I can't think of a better, city to be in. And so I had a lot of opportunity. I had a chance to meet a lot of people in business. But I just kind of gravitated more towards healthcare, because I really looked up to a guy named Vern Laux, who was a former chairman and CEO of Baxter Healthcare, and still am friends with him today. He's a tremendous individual. And he just kind of, I just, ran a big company there called Baxter Healthcare, and I just looked up to him, and I got an opportunity to meet him and spend some time with him. And then when the time came, and I knew I was going to be at the end of my career, we had a meeting, and he said, "What's your degree?" And I said, "English." And he said, "Well, we don't have a lot of English majors around here, but if you can communicate and do those types of things, I think, you'd be a great salesperson." And that's where I started. People like that, and Paul Zimmerman, and folks that I met along the way that just have been a tremendous kind of influence on me.
And we talked a little bit about this before we were on air, but with everything going on today, the healthcare world, we're leaning very heavily on there. It's to provide safety, security, and keep everybody healthy during the pandemic that we're in. Has that had any effect on you and your career? And what are your organizations you're involved with doing to kind of help those individuals who might be affected?
Well, a couple of our companies are still doing reasonably well. Other ones, obviously not as much, because things are shut down. That's just the way kind of everybody is. But, we just had a call this morning, and one of our companies kind of pivoted and started producing hand sanitizer. And so you don't think about that, right? Never probably even thought about that ability to do that, but they did, and have done, tremendously well with it, and just have shown ingenuity and strength to be able to pivot in an environment like that. And I think that was just an amazing accomplishment. So you're seeing things like that from some of our companies that are saying, hey, how can we get involved to help, kind of change the direction of this pandemic and flatten it and get people back out to work again and have people stay safe. So for me, it was inspirational to see people that got out there and say, hey, what can I do to make this better? And by the way, I have some things that I could work on to help that.
Yeah, it's a crazy time, an unprecedented time, and it's definitely scary for a lot of individuals. But it is very cool to see the country come together. And like you said, people who might not have a position within healthcare try and come forward and say, you know what, I want to help and I want to make a difference. So definitely is cool to see a lot of different people coming together.
Right.
Whether it's in football or the business world, you have to have some sort of leadership tendencies. Growing up, whether it be in the game or outside of the game, did you take on any leadership roles that helped prepare you for where you are today?
Yeah, I think I kind of always tried to do what I talked about earlier is really kind of lead by example. And I think when you do that, people take notice of that, and they like that. They like that more than people that seem to be more vocal but really aren't really leading. They just maybe want to hear themselves talk or like to hear themselves talk, or maybe think that that's a leadership attribute. Excuse me. And it's not really. I think it's showing people that you care and showing them that you have their best interests in mind when you make decisions and do things. And I was very lucky. I got recognized, and I was a captain on every team that I've ever been through, from high school to college, to the Bears. And so, I just think I try to naturally assume that role, not intentionally. It just kind of comes to you if you kind of try to lead by example.
And kind of within the same frame, was there anything that you took from the game of football? If you had to pick one thing that maybe influenced you the most, what is the one thing you've learned from the game of football that has helped you the most in your business career?
I think it's hard work. I think it really is. I think that you have to show people that you're willing to work as hard as necessary and and put in the hours and do the things necessary to be successful. And that's what I tried to do when I played. I always stayed out late after practice. I stayed out late after practice when I was in junior high, when I was in high school, when I was in college, when I was with the Bears, and we used to do double sessions back then. And so you had to stayed out and did pass sets, for about an hour afterwards, just trying to focus on, what I needed to work on. And I think that helped me. So, I would have rather been in the locker room. I would have rather been there having a Gatorade or whatever, and in an ice bath and doing all that kind of stuff and recuperating. But I just felt like if I could put a little bit extra time in, and it was available to have extra time, then I was going to be that much of a better player and competitor.
We've mentioned a lot of those values, along with our values that we talked about at the beginning, and things like hard work and teamwork and everything along those lines. For some of the youth that might be watching today that may be thinking about, do I play sports? Do I don't play sports? Do I get involved with some extracurricular activities? Why would you say it is important for youth today to be involved in something? It just doesn't have to be sports. It could be something like a drama club, or they can learn an instrument. Why do you think it would be important for youth today to get involved in things like that?
Well, I think team sports are incredibly valuable. And I think that when you're talking about teamwork and being part of a team, I always try to say that, all the individual goals like we talked about earlier, but, you can get all these great awards and you can get all these great, kind of recognition and notoriety individually. But for me, it's always been, there's nothing better or more satisfying to be part of a team, and to be part of that team and to do something that's exceptional. And that's why I talk about 1985. Everybody took, with the Bears, everybody took any of those selfish goals, anything that they wanted to be, I wanted to make this all pro, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to be player of the year, whatever, most valuable player. They put all that aside and put the team first. And I think if you talk to all the guys that I played with on those teams, they're going to tell you that winning the Super Bowl in 1985 means way more than any of those individual goals. So I think if you're a young person and you're looking at getting engaged in sports, I think team sports are incredibly valuable. It teaches you to be part of a team and to, be a giving part of that team.
I'm glad you mentioned the Super Bowl. I was just going to get into that. Looking at the picture there behind you, reminded me. So, everybody's goal, if it isn't to make it to the Hall of Fame as a football player, it's to play and win a Super Bowl. So, going through that experience with your entire team, what was the game itself like, and was it a surreal moment, after that game was over and you were recognized, finally as a Super Bowl champion?
It was, Jake. It was kind of interesting because when you get there, you ran out for introductions and everything, and you're just kind of, everything's kind of happening slower and different. It is a surreal experience, because you're just kind of drinking it all in and then taking it all in, and then we had such great success early, and then beat the Patriots pretty soundly. And at the end of the game, you heard people around the stadium singing the Super Bowl shuffle and doing all that stuff. And at the end it almost was a little anticlimactic because you knew the result was a foregone conclusion. We were going to win the game, so we were just kind of getting ready. We just wanted to go out and celebrate with our teammates and celebrate a victory.
Now, one of the questions we do like to ask, and it's fun to hear the answer, you've been fortunate enough now to win a Super Bowl ring, and you're also going to receive that Kay Jewelers Ring of Excellence. So the question is, if you had to pick one, which one would you pick over the other?
Well, I don't have a Kay Ring of Excellence yet, so I can't. It's hard to make that decision. But, like I said, that Super Bowl ring is such a special, memento of what we did as a team, and 45 guys, 45 men and coaches and organization working together for one common goal. I think when you look at that, it'd be hard to kind of replace that. And like I said, I haven't got the Ring of Excellence yet, and that's going to mean a tremendous amount to me as well. But that Super Bowl ring with your teammates is pretty special.
And we're winding down here. Only got time for a few more questions. And you mentioned, being that difference between, winning as a team and that individual goal. And you've talked a lot about what being part of a team means to you. Would you say that might, looking back on your career, that was probably one of your most favorite moments, is just being part of that team? Or is there any specific moments throughout your career that stand out more special than others?
It's the team aspects. I mean, I have my pals from high school, Freedom High School, where I went to, and I grew up in Conway, and that my high school team in 1977, when we won the Midwestern Athletic Conference title, we were undefeated. Those guys, that team has a special place in my heart because we, the year before we were like 2-7-1 team. We got, beat up pretty well, but we knew we could be pretty special if we put in the hard work, and we were. And then the same thing when I got, to Pitt and played on a couple, 11-1 teams and went to major bowl games, and then, all my teammates that I had there, and then with the Bears. So I've had great teammates and great, kind of team memories of success. And I think that's important to remember. And that's why it's a team sport. And the Hall of Fame has a lot of individuals in it, and that's true, but all those individuals are part of great teams.
All right, we're going to wrap things up here in a second. But the last question I always like to ask, and I like to end every program this way, because it does give us a good view on, what the game of football means, and what you've learned throughout your career, both on and off the field. If for everybody watching today, whether they're a student who's doing this for school, whether they're a Bears fan, I've seen a lot of Bear Down comments on the Facebook live stream today, or they're from your hometown. I'm glad you said Freedom High School in Conway, because I have seen some stuff pop up in the chat there too as well. So no matter who's watching this program, any age level, what would one piece of advice you would like everybody to take away from today?
I just think when you look back on any athlete's career, there's different points in that career where you kind of, got to the top of the mountain. And like I said, I've been very fortunate to have great coaches and great teammates, and that's allowed me to be successful. And so, I'm really happy that I'm being, recognized in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which is just a dream come true and a tremendous, I guarantee you, when I started playing football over the Conway Raiders when I was 8 years old, I didn't think about the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And so I didn't think about that. But when you think about things like that, you were always part of a team that got you there. And the teams I played on and my teammates are so important to me. And I just think when you're a player or an athlete looking at something like this, that's why team sports are so important to this country, and they should remain that way.
I think with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this installment of the Pro Football Hall of Fame's Heart of a Hall of Famer series, powered by Extreme Networks. Mr. Covert, from myself, all of our youth and education team who are watching today, all the way up to our president and CEO, Mr. David Baker, I want to thank you for participating, and thank you for everything you've done, in your short time with the Hall of Fame. And I'm sure you're going to go do even more great things down the road. And thank you for everything you've done for the game of football itself. I like to say, the game of football wouldn't be like it is today without all of our Hall of Famers' influence. So thank you for everything you've done for the game of football, and thank you for everything you've done for the Hall of Fame. And before we end things, just another couple quick announcements here. If you want more of this content like we're offering today, stay tuned to all of our Pro Football Hall of Fame social media channels, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and tune in. We got a special program tonight. John Clayton, who worked with ESPN, is going to be connecting into our Facebook page to talk about the NFL schedule release and some of the matchups they see. So tune into our Facebook Live right here again tonight at 8:15 to kind of get an initial reaction of the schedule release. And also, if you're a podcast listener, I know podcasts are becoming super important, super popular nowadays with everybody being at home. But tune into the Pro Football Hall of Fame's The Mission podcast, hosted by my coworker, great friend, Mr. Jameer Howerton, who's going to be interviewing not only Hall of Famers, but guys in the media, and so many different individuals to talk about what's going on in the football today and get their reaction. So make sure you guys tune in to get all the football content that you can get to us from the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So with that being said, I'd like to send one more thank you to you, Mr. Covert, for participating today. Thank you for taking time out of your day, talking with us at the Hall of Fame. And I learned a lot, and I just appreciate you connecting in, and we look forward to having you in Canton, Ohio here very soon.
Thank you, Jake. Great being with you today.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I'd like to thank Extreme Networks one last time for all their help and support. That's going to be another installment of the Pro Football Hall of Fame's Heart of a Hall of Famer program, powered by Extreme Networks here on Facebook. So, again, thank you for everybody. Thank you, Mr. Covert. Thanks for everybody who tuned in, and we hope to see you all one day at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.